Hello and welcome to the BikeRadar Podcast. I'm Jack Luke, BikeRadar's digital editor, and today I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Chris Mehlman, a man who is at the pointy end of gravel racing, and he's going to be talking us through his really, really cool bike, which exemplifies, covers, includes all of the trends we're seeing in gravel race bikes in 2025. Chris, how are you doing today? Where are you dialing in from? And give us a bit of background on who you are and why we need to hear about your exciting bike.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Chris Mehlman. I'm from Colorado Springs in the US. And yeah, I'm a gravel racer and mountain bike racer. And yeah, this has been Unbound is obviously the biggest gravel race in the world, I would say. That's at least my opinion. And I've done the XL a couple times, and kind of just keep trying to knock on the door to win it. And one of the key things of the race is really just bike setup. It's 350 miles, a lot can happen, and so trying to optimize for pretty unique conditions in Kansas is really important. So yeah, it's been a fun project.
So you're a man, you say, knocking on the door of winning it. That clearly sets your intentions and your background as a racer. Give us a bit of background into what you've done in your gravel and mountain biking racing career to date. Show off your chops. No shame in it.
Yeah, so I started off doing XC mountain bike racing as a junior. A lot of people in the US race in NICA, which is like the high school league, and we had a similar thing in New England called now it's called New England Youth Cycling. And so, I've been mountain biking before that, and I just tried racing. And then over time, I realized that XC didn't really suit me. I'm much better at long stuff, which is, I'd say, somewhat unique for someone on the younger end of the age spectrum. And I just enjoy the long stuff more as well. I really enjoy the adventure element. So yeah, I started doing kind of marathon mountain bike stage races and stuff, and then got into gravel racing in 2022, which feels like a different generation in the gravel world. It was definitely a different sport back in 2022, and that was my first time doing Unbound XL. And yeah, I kind of went in just thinking, oh man, I just want to finish this race, and ended up fourth. And then 2023 ended up fifth in a very, very different situation, which we'll get into in terms of conditions. And then last year didn't do it, but then this year at the Track 560, the first edition they had, I was fourth. And yeah, then the big goal for the year is, just trying to find a way to win Unbound XL. So that's kind of been my general
Wow.
trajectory.
That is a serious Palmares, as they like to say. Now, you say you like the longer stuff in gravel racing. Unbound 200 is the sort of like the big event everyone goes for, the long event. But what specifically has drawn you to the 350? And then in the case of the track, the longer version there, like what is it about those really long events which intrigues you?
I think it's the adventure element. I think if you're gonna go somewhere, especially say for example with the Traka, it's such a cool way to experience the region. You really get to see like every corner of an area of a specific race location. So like with the Traka, we were in the Pyrenees, we were on the coast, kind of in some of the plains, and just got to experience even different architecture styles in different regions, which is really cool. And if you're going to travel across the world, one thing I think about is people think about miles per gallon or miles per liter of gas, and I think about dollars per mile in a race. Like if you're going to spend money flying to a race, you might as well get more mileage out of it. And so, yeah, I like that. I also like how welcoming I think that the ultra distance stuff is, or the longer distance stuff is. I think that we've continuously seen that elite level gravel is getting more and more kind of roady. It's getting really intense every little marginal gain, and of course, I'm definitely guilty of that. But I think that the ultra side is still it's a good community, and so I really enjoyed being in it.
Fantastic. So the reason everyone's tuning in, we're bike nerds here on the podcast. You got a really interesting bike for 2025, which we will come on to. But to give a bit of context as to how we've got there here, talk us through your bike setups to date through these events, and then we'll come on to how you've changed for 2025 and the Unbound XL.
Yeah, so when I first started gravel, I was on 40C tires. This was 2022, and I was like, "Wow, these are nice. These are pretty wide." And honestly, like coming from the mountain bike side, I just had no conception of like what tire pressure to run, and I didn't really know about like tire pressure calculators. Like now Silka has one, Vittoria has one, Wolf Tooth has one. Everyone has tire pressure calculator. So I was running like high 30s, low 40s PSI. And I was like, yeah, because you're pretty narrow tires compared to, when I'm running on a mountain bike. Like I can't run on low pressure. Didn't have inserts. And yeah, that was kind of the intro. And then in 2023, I started running like 45, 47C tires. And that was as wide as I could fit in my bike then. And then I would say that, more and more there's been a trend towards wider is faster. But I also think like for the ultra scene, it's not just that wider is faster, it's that wider is more durable, it's more comfortable, which is really key. And at the end of the day, like one thing I really like to think about is the fastest setup isn't necessarily like the most aero or the fastest setup in a wind tunnel or on paper. It's the fastest setup. It's the setup that's going to get you to the finish faster. And so, like for example, I work with Vittoria Tires, and their product designer is really into that. Where it's like, yeah, we have some really really fast tires, really lightweight casings and stuff, but at the end of the day, what's going to get you to the finish line the fastest? And so I've really tried to think of my bike setup from that standpoint. So that includes durability, that includes comfort, and then also just like, of course, there's the rolling resistance side and stuff like that, and aerodynamics. But it's really it's more complicated than just testing on paper. But it's been quite an evolution, and I think gravel itself is changing so fast that brands almost can't even keep up. Like you know, 40C tires used to be big, and 45C tires were really big. And now it's like, everyone's running mountain bike tires. You show up to a race and every pro's like absolutely maxing out their gravel bike. So yeah.
Just for kind of to set the scene before we come into your new bike, what specific bikes are you running then with those wider gravel tires, but not quite as wide as what you've come onto?
Yeah, so 2023, I was running the Pivot Vault, the old version. And so that was it was pretty progressive for its time. I think it was released well, the general frame was released in like 2018, 2019, but it had clearance for like 47C tires, which is pretty wide. It had more of like a cyclocross geometry, so a bit more aggressive. Um, but yeah, I mean, I was just kind of maxing out the maxing out the tire clearance there, and then since then they released a new version that's just last fall of the Pivot Vault, and kind of in line with a lot of other bikes, it's become more progressive, so it has longer reach, a bit higher stack, slacker head angle, it's suspension corrected fork, clearance for 50C tires, though I've definitely gone beyond that. I'll be totally honest. You could fit like a 225 up front and a 2 inch in the rear. So yeah, it's just been a slow progression of bike setups, and I think like some aspects have stayed the same, like for the long races, like aero bars and things like that. But I'd say tire clearance, geometry, and just like general like suspension and everything has definitely changed, because I was not running suspension back in even back in 2023. Like I was like, oh, why would you want suspension on a gravel bike?
Well, you've given it away. The big reveal for Unbound XL 2025, you will be running a Pivot LES SL,
Yep.
a hardtail mountain bike with suspension and drop bars. It is a pretty cool looking bike. There's loads of really great nerdy details we're going to go into, but the top main question everyone wants to know: why a mountain bike? Why specifically a hardtail mountain bike with a fork for this event?
Yeah, so I think 2023 was a big lesson for me. So the person who won is a good friend of mine named Logan Casper. I know you know Logan Jones Wilkins, who
Mm.
writes for BikeRadar, and he's also a good friend of mine. But Logan Casper is he's kind of a little bit of a legend in the U.S. ultra scene. But he was running a hardtail drop bar mountain bike with a 100 mil suspension fork and actually full mountain bike tires. And his mentality was, it may not be the fastest setup, but I'm just going to run no matter what. And as it turned out, it was super muddy. And everyone with gravel bikes, no matter how much clearance you have in a gravel bike, it's all very marginal differences, a few millimeters here and there. And you might be able to fit a really wide tire, but it doesn't mean you have clearance to spare. And when it's the peanut butter mud that is in Kansas, it's almost like cement that starts caking to your tires, and it clogs up your bike and you can't ride. And the hardtail paid off big time there. In addition, Unbound is quite chunky. It's not technical from a single track standpoint, but it's a very rough terrain. And at night, you're not able to pick good lines. You're really tired. You're following other people. You you have lights, but you're in a pace line, there's shadows and stuff, and so you hit stuff in ways that you ideally wouldn't hit rocks if you were picking proper lines. And so I think for me, like Unbound 2023, you know, the mud caused a lot of problems. Like, there's a lot of hiking, and that's just because I was running as big a tire as I could fit in my frame. And so looking into, the future, I was like, I want to run a hardtail because then I can run a wide volume tire to deal with how rough the terrain is, how lucky you are to flat and stuff, and still have tire clearance to spare. Because there's just like, as I said, there's a difference between tire clearance and like tire clearance to spare, because just because you can fit a big tire doesn't mean it's gonna do well when you start kicking up with mud if you have 1 mil of clearance to spare. So that was kind of the impetus behind that. And then I've been running this bike and training a lot with flat bars. And what I figured out is I was able to kept fitting a larger and larger chainring. So I started with 38, and then I got a 40. And then through some experimenting, I fit a 42. And the fastest speed I've hit in Unbound XL in the last two times I've done it has been 35 miles an hour both
Mm.
times. Um, and with a 4210, that's plenty of gearing. You can do that at like 100 RPM, or maybe 110. It's yes, you don't have the straighter chain line that a lot of pros talk about, for drivetrain efficiency, but you have the gearing. So that was one hurdle overcome. And then with the suspension fork, with it being super rough, I was a little on the fence about it, but I rode a gravel suspension fork, the RockShox Rudy Explorer 40 mil at the Track of 560, and it was absolutely a game changer. For the first time, my hands weren't numb after one of these races.
Mhm.
I was able to descend stuff much faster with more confidence because you just can ride over. It just makes it a lot smoother. And so 100 mils might seem like a crazy choice, but with how rough Unbound is, at the end of the day, like maybe it's not as fast if it comes down to a sprint, but the likelihood of that is pretty low. I think last year was maybe the first time Unbound XL has come down to a sprint. And so you want to optimize for the majority of the race, and the majority of Unbound is rough gravel. So that's kind of the impetus behind the mountain bike.
I'm quite interested specifically on the fork. You had some good notes in that you shared very kindly before the podcast. You say you're running like a 2019 factory SC32, would have been a super lightweight cross country fork in its day. Still a perfectly good fork, absolutely nothing wrong with it. But, leaving its mountain bike chops aside, how does it compare to the Rudy in riding? Like, what are the differences out on the trail? How do you feel the two?
Yeah, so I would say that the biggest thing is the Rudy feels when you first get on it, if you're coming from a rigid gravel bike, it almost feels like your headset's loose because there's so little travel. You're riding it, it's like something's not right. But it's not necessarily suspension that you notice a ton. It smooths things out in a way that just makes it more comfortable over time, means you can ride over stuff faster. With the 100 mil fork, you really can feel it, especially out of the saddle. So one of the challenges is I don't need all 100 millimeters, but I also don't want to run a super low pressure, because then it's just going to be super soft and out of the saddle. You're going to, it's not going to feel super nice. So I haven't done this yet, but one thing I'm thinking of is actually putting in as many volume spacers as I can into the fork so that I can run a slightly lower pressure and have it really supple up top, but have a really high high progression rate. So it almost rides more like a Rudy, like a 40 mil or 50 mil fork. Um, so you could technically run a gravel fork in this bike. The problem is, what would happen is it would just completely screw the geometry. I mean, it's built for a 100 mil fork. It's not built for a 40 mil
No.
fork. You would have a super steep head tube, so that's just not optimal. And then with regards to the age of the fork, quite honestly, that's just because that's the fork I have, and
Listen in,
I've
get this guy sponsored. Get him a 2025 fork. He's doing cool stuff.
so I full disclosure, I do get a so I will talk about this, but I downsized frames to because we'll talk about geometry. Obviously, one of the challenges with switching to a mountain bike with drop bars is the reach, and the fit is meant for flat bars, not for drop bars. So I did get a new factory fork with the new frame, but I don't necessarily want to run it because if it's muddy, it's just gonna wreck it. And at
Mhm.
the end of the day, like this fork is still it's a little heavier, but functionally it's still a great fork, and I just don't think you need to necessarily run the newest stuff. It's still it's still a great fork. And at the end of the day, the reason why I had it is because like no one wants 100 millimeter forks for mountain bikes anymore. But then I'm like, wait a second. If I hold on to it long enough, it's like, clothes come back into fashion. This is going to come back into fashion for gravel. And so I think I've kind of seen that come full circle.
Old mountain bike forks about to become a lot more desirable when you win XL riding it, I'm sure. Sticking with comfort,
We'll see about that.
sticking with comfort, cockpit choice hugely personal, but there's some general trends we'll see at Unbound, and I think your cockpit exemplifies some of them. So let's go full nerd. Talk us through everything you're running up front on the bike.
Yeah, so cockpit's really interesting. As I mentioned, I downsize frames because when you run this will kind of make sense to people who are familiar with drop bars, but when you put drop bars on, it extends the reach of your bike. And mountain bikes tend to have, a longer reach because they're optimized for flat bars. And so you have to run a pretty short stem. So I kind of started off with that. I'm like, okay, how am I going to get this to fit? I started off on my old XL frame and I was running a 35 mil mountain bike stem, which is as short as you can go. It's essentially slammed up against your handlebars are slammed up against the steer. Um, and I've experimented a bit with that, but that was kind of the first step. I initially was running the Escape, the USE components Escape GR24 bars in width, 40 width, and then I found the flare was a little wide, so now I'm running the GR12, which has a 12 mil flare, and that's super optimal just because it's enough flare where you get nice control. You can run your hoods tilted in a little bit, but it's not too much where it's a little bit like gangly. So that was those are kind of the first two things. I found that 40 mil is a good width for me. I run the same on my regular gravel bike. I've gone down from the 46 mil. I mean, I'm 6'2", like 188 centimeters, I think that roughly is. And traditionally the stock width has been like a 46. And I started off racing gravel on that and it felt fine because I came from the mountain bike side. But as I've understood aero more and just gotten into like the specifics of cockpit, I've just slowly narrowed. And then the other thing I'm running are the USE TR2 clip-on aero bars, and I'm running like 10 mils of spacers with them. I'm still experimenting with it whether I want to cut them down, but quite honestly, the main reason for the aero bars is yes, aerodynamics, but also comfort. So what you'll find is in races this long, your hands get very tired of just the constant, even with a suspension fork, just the constant bouncing up and down. It's a lot of pressure in your hand. And so having that extra position, I call it like the couch because it feels like when you're in the middle of the night and you're able to get in the aero bars, it's like, it just feels like kind of the closest thing to lying down in your bed you possibly can get. And then with regards to bar tape, I'm running, it's actually a discontinued product I just had lying around, and it was the ESI RCT wrap. So for people familiar, a lot of mountain bike racers will be familiar with ESI grips. They're like silicone grips. They're super comfy. You can run them with or without gloves. They have different thicknesses. And this is essentially like a bar tape version of that, and they're really thick, which also helps add comfort, and feels like I have more control when I'm running thick bar tape. And then the other advantage is they don't have a sticky side, so they're really easy to wrap and unwrap. So I've actually reused them on a couple sets of bars. And then I'm running SRAM Force shifters. So these are the current generation. If I had a choice, I would run the new red shifters, and that's just for braking performance. For people who have experienced those new red shifters, the braking is just it's next level. You can brake with one finger, and if you're coming from a mountain bike side, it feels like you're on a mountain bike. So for me, that would be my ultimate choice. But those are I don't get those for free, and so they're pretty expensive. But these are a great option. I run them on my gravel bike, so it feels natural, and I run them slightly tilted in, just like roughly in line with the drops. I think some people run their hoods extremely, extremely tilted in for aerodynamic reasons. For me, it's more that naturally your hands are tilted in a little bit, and so it doesn't feel natural to have them completely straight. But also, I need good braking, and so I don't want to run them so tilted in where like I can't brake properly. The final bit of the cockpit, which is sort of related, is the light setup. So that was I'm running like a extender mount for my exposure six pack, and then mounted the light on there. And that's because with the short stem, it's makes it harder to to mount a light on there. So yeah, that's kind of the cockpit setup.
How does it ride then? So, like, mountain bike designed for flat bars, you're running drop bars. Are there any compromises in terms of the handling when you're out on your big long adventures?
So what I would say is if you're coming from a gravel bike, and I notice this every time I switch between the two bikes, I have my vault pivot vault, which is the gravel bike I have. It's pretty slack head angle, but it's not as slack as the hardtail. When I first get out of the saddle on this bike, it feels really weird. It feels really floppy, but it's only like the first 5 seconds, and then it feels natural. So you have to get used to that. The other thing is the bike is a lot longer. So if you think of it like driving a Fiat versus driving a truck, um, this is probably, as weird as it sounds, this probably is not the best bike for really tight single track. I know it is a mountain bike, but because the wheelbase is much longer, it's just not as snappy. But for Unbound, I mean, anyone who's seen Unbound before, seen the courses, a lot of photos are just dead straight roads for 10 miles. You kind of just need something that can eat up chunk in straight lines, and this is perfect for that. It's super stable with a long wheelbase, super stable with the slack head angle. So yeah, that's kind of one thing. And then just in terms of general comfort, one thing about this bike that you'll notice, if you see photos of it, is I have a very long seat post. So I have long legs, and because I downsized frames and the less has a sloping top tube, the seat tube is relatively short. And one thing, that was a challenge in itself finding a seat post that worked, but also it's really comfortable because there's so much seat post to flex. And that's really important. It means like, yeah, if you're on the pedals, the bike itself is stiff, the frame is stiff, but when you're sitting in the saddle for 24 hours on rough terrain, having that extra comfort is really important. So I'd say it's comfortable, it's stable, and it's just a fun bike to ride as well.
I'm just sorry. I'm zooming in as we're chatting there, looking at the seat post. That is a skyscraper. That is absolutely remarkable. What is the post then for those who have similarly gazelle-like legs?
Yeah, so it's a Woodman's GT2 seat post. It's 450 mils long. I was almost able to run the stock seat post, but not quite. I've just got my proportions. I'm mostly legs and less so arms, hence why I have to run a short stem, and hence why I had to downsize to get the reach right. But Woodman makes they actually make a 550 mil as well, which I also got, which is just funny to look at, which I think would have been too long. I would have had to cut it down, but the 450 mil works great, and it's an alloy post, which with the seat post that long, I think it's better to run an alloy post. You just never know. It's a lot of leverage on a 27.2 post. And then the big key was just getting obviously there's a minimum insert point for seat posts, and the most important thing is having the insertion part of the post pass the top tube and seat tube junction. That's really important for frame integrity, and so that was kind of the main reason for going with this one.
Interesting. Okay, let's move on to the wheels and tires then. Probably the most hotly debated bit of tech and Unbound as a whole. And your setup is, like, in the context of what is a fairly wild bike, I dare say probably the most like normal part of this bike.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm running Maple XCR wheels. They're a small New England-based brand, and they're actually since it's a mountain bike, it has boost spacing, so I can't run the gravel wheels. And these are the wheels that I normally race, my on my Mach Pivot Mach 4 SL, which is my full suspension mountain bike. So I'm racing it in Breck Epic and super technical mountain bike races and stuff. They have a 29 mil internal width. And then on them, I'm running Vittoria Treno Zero 2-inch tires. They're roughly supposed to be 50C or 2 inches, but because of the wide rims, they measure up like 2.15. And they're the slickest gravel tires Vittoria makes. So They've got a pretty wide slick patch in the center and then like a little bit of kind of scale tread on the edges, but essentially they're just a slick tire. And there's a couple of reasons I'm running these. So first off, they have one of the thickest tread casings out there. So if you're a nerd and go on bicycle rolling resistance and
Oh,
you
don't
sort
worry, you're in good
gravel.
company. It's the most
Yes.
frequently external visited external website in Bike Radar, I
Yeah, so
reckon.
if you look, you'll notice that the tread casing is really thick, and what that means is they're super durable. The sidewall casing is also thick, and my number one priority with wheel and tire setup is durability. So I'm running these with the Vittoria Airliner Gravel Light inserts, which is they're ones they released last year. And the second reason I'm running these tires is, people might see a slick tire for gravel and they're like, why are you running a slick? But one of the problems with tread, I feel, is if the rocks are large enough, tread doesn't dig into anything. And so the most important thing is contact patch for grip. And with a 2.1, you can run a pretty low pressure even with how heavy the bike is, because you're carrying a lot of gear on the bike, so you have to think about that as well. And you can get a good contact patch. And with Unbound, there's uh, I'd say less cornering than something like the Traca or a really technical gravel race. And so for a lot of it is just tire durability and and also how fast it rolls. So I'd say this is like a good combo between those two, a good balance between those two. Um, and then the final thing is just like tire clearance. So because I have a hardtail, 2.1 is not very wide. I mean, that's what people were racing mountain bikes on, 10 years ago. Everyone thought that was fast, but this bike's built for a 2.4. I think you could fit like a 2.5. I haven't experimented, but I've definitely run 2.4s and there's plenty of clearance to spare. And so I actually have a lot of clearance still left, even though I'm running wide volume tire. And so that's kind of the nice part of the situation. One last thing is mud clearance. So if it's muddy, I know there's mud tires and everything, but sometimes the best tire is just a slick because it has the least surface area for mud to grab onto. So that's kind of the reasoning behind this tire setup. And then for sealant, that's a really interesting one. I'm actually running a custom blend of sealant, and this is something that I'm surprised more people haven't thought of. But if you're doing a really important race, people spend, thousands of dollars on little bits of bike setups to save a few grams. But one thing that is pretty cheap is sealant. Like I spent like $20-$30 on a bottle of custom sealant made by Parkside, which is a California-based brand. And I was just talking with them. He makes sealant in his garage. And I'm like, what if we made a sealant that has a lot of latex in it? Because it won't last long, but I don't need it to last long. I only need it to last a few days, but I need it to seal well. And that's kind of the conundrum people fall into. So, like, for example, I traditionally use orange seal, and they have an endurance formula, which is great if you don't want faff of changing seal in your tires, it's great. But the regular sealant seals better, and you kind of can't have the best of both worlds. Like, inevitably, there's if you want something that seals better, it's probably not going to last as long. So I went with the seals as well as possible, but won't might only last a week. So it's going to be interesting to see if more people start doing that because it's a pretty cheap way to make your setup a lot better. So,
It's interesting you mentioned that. You've itched a memory in the back of my brain. I did an interview with Jose Hermida, former world champion,
yep,
prior to the Olympics, and he'd sort of been on the sneaky, been training Tom Pidcock, who went on to win the gold at the Olympics. Now he said he actually had worked with Pidcock on this very area. He'd worked with a special sealant formula, which he almost says, almost word to word what you just said. It was kind of like glue, but after a week, it was asphalt. I think you're definitely
yep.
onto something here. Maybe sealant is the next frontier of tire tech performance. That's a good headline. I might even write for Bike Radar and use you as a source.
Yeah, I mean it is interesting because it's not a in the grand scheme of things, it's not very expensive. Like bike parts are so expensive now, and if you're going to be changing tires anyway, which if you're racing, you probably are used to swapping tires all the time. Having a sealant that doesn't last super long, that's not a big deal. I mean, at the end of the day, like you might be, I need these wheels for my for my mountain bike after, so I'm gonna be swapping tires back. So it just kind of makes sense to do that. So it will be interesting to see if more people will start doing that.
You're letting your secrets out. And on to more secrets. There's a good bit to talk through on your crankset specifically. So we've heard about your gearing setup, your 42 chainring. I want to hear more about that crankset and the sort of conundrum you faced, I suppose, in coming to the solution.
Yeah, so technically the less fits a 38, which is pretty standard for a hardtail for any mountain bike, really. Most people, maybe except for Keegan Swenson and people like that, they don't need crazy large chainrings. Racing gravel, you do want a larger chainring. And so what I've done is I was initially going to try running a force spider with a like force gravel chainring on the crankset because it's the same 8 bolt pattern as these with these XXL cranks. And I model that sort of after Keegan's Leadville bike from Keegan Swenson's Leadville bike from a few years ago. The problem is those chainrings have like a 6 mil offset, so it won't fit. So pretty much I went with the XXSL crank solely not for the weight, not for all the other performance benefits of the top end crank. It's the fact that it has a 55 mil chain line, but it keeps a 168 mil Q factor. And so if you run a 0 mil offset chainring, you could fit something a little bigger. And I'm running a Cork 4 bolt power spider, and I'm running a Garbarook 42T 104 BCD chainring. And as far as I know, they're the only company that makes that chainring. So they make a 104 BCD up to like 50T or 48 teeth, which is pretty amazing, and it's a 0 mil offset. That means you can fit a pretty large chainring because most, if you're trying to get a normal chainring for this bike, SRAM only makes up to I think a 38, and a lot of them are like if they're technically supposed to be 3 mil offset for this 55 mil chain line, just with the way this bike's set up. I shifted the crankset about 0.5 mil over to the right, so running 2.5 mil spacers on the dry side, and it just barely clears. And one advantage of a hardtail is you don't really get as much of that lateral flex that you might get in a full suspension. And so I've tested it, and there's enough clearance. But this is definitely the maximum I could run.
I think this is definitely their brand, Garbrick, who have like made their entire business off of being the only brand that whatever it is you're trying to achieve,
Yeah,
you always see it on Weird and Wonderful brands.
exactly.
They're very, very good for picking this stuff out. On to our final and perhaps the most important part of the puzzle, Unbound XL, defined by the fact it is a very long bike race, fully self-sufficient. I imagine you've put a great, great deal of thought into your bag setup, which is extensive.
Yep.
Talk us through what you're going to run for the race.
Yeah, so to start off, I'm running a 3 liter Tailfin top tube bag. I just started working with Tailfin, and I ran their stuff for the first time at the Traca, and it was just blown away. I met them at Sea Otter, and like their products are, you could tell they're designed by people who actually use the bags because they're stiff, they don't flop around, they're easy to open. Every little detail is thought through. And for me, like there, Unbound is a little different from the Traca in the sense that water is probably the most important thing. The Traca, there's a lot of spigots in places. There's less food. Unbound, Americans like convenience. There are 24-hour gas stations in every little Kansas town, even if the town has 200 people. So it's a little easier to get food, but it's also tends to be pretty hot. And so for me, the top two bag is kind of like my food storage. I have my battery pack. I have some key spares like spare axis battery, chain lube, and then I have like some extra CO2s, and it has little custom dividers you can move around to create like separate compartments in the top two bag. And then for a frame bag, I'm actually sort of between two options. So right now I've got the 2.9 liter wedge frame bag on there, and that's gonna hold a hydration bladder. And then the reason for that is I can fit like a small bottle, like a 600 ml bottle on the down tube, and then I can fit up like 900 ml bottle on the seat tube. The other option, 900 ml bottle on new custom bag they have for the cool thing with Tailfin is if you ever see their white bags on people's bikes, those are prototypes, but it's not like, oh, this is, the classic, oh, they were only making this for pros. Sorry, you're never going to have it. they're testing it out because they want to make it for consumers. So you will eventually be able to buy it, which is really cool. So I'm sort of between those two, but really the big thing is water capacity, and I want to be able to carry at least 5 liters of water, possibly six. It's a relatively flat race. The hills are short, and one of my strategies is just trying to avoid stopping early on because the early gas station stops are absolute chaos. I mean, people are in such a rush, and it's just super stressful. And so if you can just keep going, get beyond that, that's I think a big yeah, a big advantage. So.
Might I assume you'll also be running some sort of hydration vest or pack as well?
Yeah, so I'm running a USWE pack, and I usually run for most races. I run the Outlander Pro 2 liter, which is like their lightest, most minimal pack. For this one, I'm most likely going to run their Rush 8 liter, and it fits it. Doesn't technically fit it, but it does fit a 3 liter bladder, which is a lot on your back, but I found it pretty comfy, and it's also got some pockets up front, to store spares. So, like for example, when you're doing a race like this where you pack stuff is really important because you can't be searching, you can't stop and just dig through your bags. So for me it's really important to kind of keep it consistent. So like I have cargo bib pockets from Endurance Threads, which is the kit brand I work with, and my left pocket is my trash can. So like I'll just put all of my wrappers in there, and it looks hilarious because it ends up being this massive pocket filled with wrappers. My right pocket's for CO2, Dynaplug, and then also cash. And that's important because, if you say, for example, you walk into the gas station, you're like, oh shoot, I forgot my credit card or cash, then you have to walk back outside. So I just want to keep it on my body. And then with that Rush 8 liter pack, I can have some other key spares right on my body. But it's just with all these bags, it's just important to find a system that works for you. There's no right way to do it. Some people will be running like the that works for you. There's no, which is their a pack that kind of it's a from the spindle that support it. Some people will be running that. Some people will be running like a small top tube bag. But it's just finding what works for you and sticking to that.
Yeah, my two takeaways from this podcast are going to be the key to winning at Unbound are cash, no cards, and super sealant. There you go. That's the hot takes from this one.
There's one other key. That's being Lachlan Morton. He's
Well,
racing this
yeah.
year. I think that's the key to be winning Unbound XL.
Well, hopefully I get to write a great headline come Monday the 2nd or whatever it'll be, Sunday the 1st, about our wonderful Chris Mehlman. Anyway, so all of this considered, you've got every confidence in the bike. I am sure that it's going to work just as you intend. Look, what's next for gravel bike tech as a whole?
I mean, I mostly see it as heading just in the direction of mountain bikes, where there's everything from a downhill mountain bike to a hardtail cross country bike, and I think more and more brands are doing that, and just depends on the brand. So like Pivot has one gravel bike, and it's just a really good like all around. Like it's great for adventures, which I love. It's also great for racing, which I also love. But I see brands kind of starting to expand their offerings to, yeah, just to fit different consumers. Um, I have honestly talked with Pivot. I'm like, you should start selling the less as a drop bar bike as well, because you see more and more of these bikes out at races, and I think one of the coolest things about gravel racing, especially in the US, is, if you go to a mountain bike race, a lot of stuff is kind of the same. People are running, really good, nice full suspension bikes, usually 120 mils travel like the Mach 4SL. SRAM, same sort of SRAM drivetrains or Shimano drivetrains, similar bar widths, dropper posts. You go to a gravel race and it is just anything goes. I mean, I've seen some of the wackiest setups possible, but it's like this is what works for a person, and this is what works for that person. Crazy flare bars, like really wide flat bars with aero bars. The narrowest like 36 centimeter handlebars with hoods turned in so far I can't even imagine trying to break. And there's no right way to do it, and I think that's the key is, everyone looks at what the pros are doing. So like wide tires are fast, but also like wide tires are comfy. And like at the end of the day, like most people are doing gravel for fun. And even like even the pros, like you don't just want to be miserable your whole race, and sometimes comfortable is fast, and especially for these long races. So I just see like, yes, gravel, is going to trend towards what the pros are doing, but I also think like smart brands are going to go towards, okay, not just what the pros are doing, but also like what is going to be best for the consumer. So you're seeing this with some recent, I guess we'll call them the endurance road bike category or the all road bike category, where brands are trying to make bikes that are, instead of, aero bikes for people who don't need aero bikes, they're making bikes that are the right bike for a certain person. And I think that's just the same with gravel bikes. Like for some people, an aero gravel bike might be the right thing. But for a lot of people, that's just not the right choice. And you just need to think about that and to kind of move beyond, okay, what the pros are doing something for a certain reason, and that may not be the best for the individual. So yeah, I mean, if I had a choice, I would say I would love to see brands starting to offer hardtails with slightly different geometries, so just like shorter reach, meant more for drop bars, or at least just offer their hardtails in a drop bar build. I mean, it's pretty easy to do the switch. Like I running forced levers with level brakes, and quite honestly, this was my first time bleeding brakes, and I was pretty proud of myself. And I did the whole setup myself, and it was pretty easy, honestly. With the way everything mixes and matches now, especially with SRAM, like it's shockingly easy to build a like a mullet slash kind of hybrid bike like this. So
Of course, the great conundrum is going to be with all these divergent gravel bike categories, what they call the damn things. But that is a subject we've covered extensively on the podcast, and I won't get into it too much just now. Final question for you. Paint the picture, bonus question. How hard is Unbound XL? You've raced the full gamut of events imaginable, but what is it about Unbound XL which draws so many people and gives it such prestige?
I would say there's a few things that make it challenging. The number one thing is the mental aspect. I think that's the case with a lot of gravel racing, but especially when you start doing overnight stuff, um, you are going to feel miserable at some point. You're going to feel not just like miserable in the sense that, oh wow, this is just really hard 2 minute anaerobic effort like you might feel in a cyclocross race or a mountain bike, I think XCO mountain bike race. You're just going to feel absolutely empty, and you get to a point where your body is like, this is ridiculous. Can you please, please, please stop? And it's just pushing through that mentally. So I think that's one of the challenges. Obviously, the course is hard. It beats up bikes, it beats up bodies. If there's mud, you're going to be hiking. And I think that's a challenge. And then also just like the location. With the Traka, you had all these incredible views, different scenery, different terrain, and it was very mentally stimulating. When you're racing in Kansas or the Midwest, like it's beautiful in its own way, but after 350 miles of it, it can all feel the same. It can really feel like I've been here before. I'm going in circles, and it's like, no, you're not going in circles. You're riding on these straight roads, and I think that's almost one of the things that has made U.S. gravel like special is just the mental challenge of like turning right and then realizing you can see 20 miles ahead of you to the end of the road you're riding on, and it's hard. So I'd say, yeah, a lot of it is mental, and I think the best people at these ultra races are not always the strongest. A lot of it is who is mentally tough, who can deal with setbacks, who can just push through. And I think, people like Lachlan Morton, obviously are incredibly strong, but also they're just built in a way that they're able to deal with that mental challenge. So yeah, you know, it's an interesting event because I think the perception of challenge is skewed, and the perception of like what's the hardest event is skewed. Like a 200-mile gravel race is ridiculous. Like that, of course, that's a really hard event, but that's the main event. And suddenly the 100-mile in Unbound is like the short event. 100 miles is also still really long. And so I think that, yeah, it's gotten kind of this skewed perception of difficulty and what's like, yeah, what's challenging. But yeah, I would just say like the number one thing is the mental side. But the flip side of that is there's no better feeling of accomplishment than finishing one of these long races. Finishing a cyclocross race generally is, for a lot of people, it's like, okay, cool, I finished. But you often, even if you're like just racing in Cat 3, Cat 4, it's like you want to go for a result. Whereas finishing 350 miles, doesn't matter who you are, it feels really good. Like when I finished the Chaka, I mean, it's just like this feeling of euphoria, and like you just yell, like I just yelled out loud. I was so happy, and it's you don't get that with many other events. And I think if you can push through the mental challenges and get through that barrier, it's so rewarding, and it creates memories that I would say very few other types of races can.
Amazing. What a lovely note to finish on. It's important to remember we do it because it's fun. Horrible, but fun.
Type 2
Chris, that's
fun.
been yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. You've been really good. Unsurprisingly, we've got all these details over on the website. Chris has sent me through such thorough notes. The article is practically written itself, but that will be over on BikeRadar.com. A full nerdy, in-depth look at his really cool bike. Of course, my parting shot will be good luck for the race. I hope your wonderful setup sees you through to the finish with no mechanicals, no mental anguish, and a fresh body by the end. Perhaps wishful thinking on the last point, but it sounds like you're as well prepared as you possibly could be.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, it's going to be exciting to see how it goes.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening, and we'll speak to you again soon.